If you're well prepared, then riding outside all the way through the winter is a real possibility. For most of us anyway. I will let you off if it's -40 and 6 foot deep in snow where you live, but then there are always fat bikes. But regardless, riding through the winter does take its toll, and bikes particularly can bear the brunt. Now, some of you may have the luxury of a second bike with cheaper components that you can use through the winter. But frankly, no one wants to see any bike, cheaper or not, ground down into a metallic paste by that mixture of water, grit, and salt. But fear not, because you can protect your bike from the winter. Here's how. Firstly, we need to protect delicate bearings as best we can, and that means applying a waterproof grease. Now, headsets can be particularly prone, particularly this lower bearing here that's often subjected to hours of water coming up off the front wheel. So to do that, we need to remove the front wheel, we need to remove the top cap from the steerer tube here, loosen your stem bolts, take the stem off, and then tap the steerer with a plastic mallet or similar, and that will remove your front forks. Now, it should look nice and clean with a visible layer of grease on, but it can very quickly, as you'll see there, start to look really black and gunky. So simply take the bearing race off, then give it a really thorough clean, then dry, then re-grease, and then replace. Don't neglect the inside of the head tube either, because that's where loads of grit and gunk collect as well. So clean that really thoroughly, and then also put a layer of grease inside there as well. A little bit of grease on your bottom bracket bearings would also be a very good idea. Another item, whilst we've got our grease out, that would definitely benefit is our brake and gear cables. Eagle-eyed viewers may well remember actually that I advocated installing brake and gear cables completely dry for the fastest and smoothest shifting. But there was also, I hope you remember, a caveat, and that was that in bad conditions there would therefore be nothing to stop water getting sucked straight inside the housing, where it can then corrode your delicate and precious cables. So, as a minimum, in winter, make sure you stick a layer of grease on your inner cables. And if you do need to install new cables, then try and keep an eye out for a sealed system, whereby the little ferrules have tiny little rubber seals in there that, although adding a little bit of friction to the system, provide a really effective way of sealing out the bad weather and the grit from your cables. People can get a bit obsessed about chains and gears wearing out in winter. And while it is true that yes, they do wear faster in poor conditions, far worse in my book, and far more costly in fact, are wheels, and more specifically rims. Now, disc users can take a moment just to have a little chuckle to themselves, because this doesn't apply to you. But for those of us using rim brakes, poor conditions can very quickly wear away the brake track on our rims, and therefore rendering the wheel essentially useless. So, as a minimum then, you need to regularly inspect your brake pads for any little bits of grit or metal that become embedded in there, and effectively turn them into little homemade slabs of sandpaper. And then you also need to keep the wheel scrupulously clean as well. But if you have the resources, far better in my book is to actually invest in another much cheaper set of wheels. And there are some great bargains to be had out there, particularly on eBay, as people are actually selling the stock wheels that came with their bikes. And I picked up this set of Bontrager's for an absolutely banging price out there. And as a bonus, it also makes this next step much easier to do as well. Tyres. Now, there does seem to be a correlation between riding in crap conditions and having a higher risk of puncturing. So a worthwhile investment is definitely a set of thicker, heavier duty winter tyres, and then probably a set of thicker, heavier inner tubes to match. Now, that doesn't mean that you can ignore your tyres completely. You will still need to check them regularly, just in case you can find any nasties working their way through the carcass. But hopefully, it should mean that you are beset by fewer punctures in the winter. And then also, as an added bonus, when you swap back to your faster rolling, lighter summer wheels and tyres, then you will feel absolutely amazing. For about 5 minutes, because for the record, I don't think there is any training benefit to be had by using heavier wheels and tyres. Although undoubtedly, that is a debate for another video sometime. It's a really good idea as well to treat the non-moving parts on your bike at the beginning of the winter too, particularly if you've got a metal frame as opposed to a carbon one, which of course won't corrode. So at the beginning of the winter, remove your seat post and then spray a so-called frame saver type product inside. And what that'll do is it'll coat all the tubes and actually prevent corrosion from the inside out. And then actually, when it comes to replacing your seat post, you've got to remember to give it a good grease up as well, if it's metal on metal. Of course, if it's carbon, then you want to use a carbon paste instead. Finally, it almost wouldn't be a maintenance video if we didn't say clean your bike. But it's with good reason, because you need to clean your bike in the winter months. Otherwise, as I said earlier, the water and the grit will simply wear components out. In fact, you could put some serious miles on a really expensive bike through the winter, and come springtime, it could still be in great condition if you look after it properly. And so that means using a really good quality degreaser on the drivetrain regularly. It also means keeping the rims and the brakes really scrupulously clean. And then also, very important, is to make sure that you rinse the bike off thoroughly, getting rid of any salty residue from the roads before you go to store it again. And then also, when you come to re-lube it, you want to use something a little bit heavier duty, so a wet lube as opposed to a dry lube. And then choose one as well that doesn't get your chain thick with gunk after the first couple of miles. So protecting your bike in the winter is not rocket science. Keep it clean and use the right products in the right places at the right time. For some more winter tips, because we have plenty here on GCN, which is just as well, given the time of year that we're in, click just up there for winter training tips, or just down there for winter nutrition tips. And then before going to either of those, do make sure you subscribe to GCN. To do that, just click on the globe.